safe space. We ain't never give a reason you should hide. Compile all your questions, we're taking the quest. Join Tarcia on this journey to discover the rest. Go.
Welcome to the Adoption Journey podcast. I am your host, Tarcia, and welcome to another story, another adventure, another journey. Before I get started, okay, y'all know already about the Black Adoptee Meetup, right? Yeah. So go and register because we're meeting in Chicago, October 3rd through the 5th, 2025. And then we're having a really, really fun time on February 28th. It's all virtual, our virtual game night. So go check that out too. Go to the Black Adoptee Meetup Instagram page, click the links in the bio and register. Okay? So without further ado, let me introduce our guest because y'all, I'm worldwide again. I'm worldwide. I would love to introduce Dave, and Dave is all the way from the UK. Hi, Dave.
Hi.
So we are going to dive right in. My favorite first question, how old were you when you found out that you were adopted?
Yeah, so I've known as long as I've known. So I was adopted when I was 2 or 3 months. So obviously I wasn't aware at that point, but it's not been a secret. So there was you call it a scrapbook that my adoptive parents made for me that kind of had some of my information. So I've always known I was adopted. The scrapbook had my birth mother's name, it had my original name. It had more details as well, but it was something that I can remember since I was as young as I could remember that was always part of it. And I've got a sister, younger sister, who's also adopted from a different family, and she had a scrapbook too.
Okay, so my second question, were you adopted by a Black family or a white family?
By a white family.
So transracial adoptee.
Transracial, yeah.
Okay.
I only found that term out when I started listening to the podcast.
Right. So where are you from originally, and then where did they take you to? Or did they adopt you and you stayed in the area?
Yeah, so I was born in Leicester in the UK, which is in the Midlands, and my adoptive parents lived like 15 miles away, so I didn't go very far in that respect.
From that respect, you're still in the area.
Yeah.
So what is it like where you grew up? Are you surrounded by white people? Is it mixed? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great question. So Leicester, for those people that don't know, is probably...
I do not know.
Yeah, I mean, if you follow football or soccer, as you guys call it, then you might have heard of Leicester. But I say probably, I'm certain it is the most multicultural city in the UK. In fact, I think it's actually a city where white people are, and they're not the majority, mainly Asian people, but there's a real mix. It's well known. So Leicester is, there's tons of black people around. Hinckley, where I grew up, which is a small town about 15 miles away. I was the only black face.
Oh, okay. So talk about that, being the only black face. Are you learning anything about your heritage? Are you just immersed in their culture?
Yeah, so I was immersed in their culture. And it wasn't something I was conscious of. I mean, you're not as a kid, right? You just kind of get on with life as it presents itself. But looking back, there were a number of experiences that made me, or could have made me, more aware. It was kind of a blessing and I'm not going to say a curse because that's unfair, but it was a blessing, but then it had its downsides as well, but they weren't downsides that I was conscious of at the time. I was just dealing, as I say, with life as it presented itself. But I was, literally the only black kid the only black face in the whole town at that time. So even when I go back now, and I lived there again fairly recently, I still kind of go, oh, that's some black people around. Look at that.
So tell me how your parents, because now that we know you're a transracial adoptee, and we know the hair that grows out of your scalp looks different than the hair that's growing out of their scalp. I always have to ask this question about your hair. How did they take care of your hair?
Oh, you're going to go to the hair question.
I'm going there.
Yeah. So in that respect, I don't. Again, it's not something I was conscious of.
Yeah.
Because I'm a kid who's just there, and I'm just Dave, just growing up. But there were Afro combs. There was, and again, I guess in a small town in the UK, there's a lot less access to things that would link into that heritage and hair anyway. So there were Afro combs. I can remember them using Stay So Fro, which was the coconut spray. And I can remember, combing it through with the Afro comb and not liking that at all. Like that was not fun. But how they grew it was just, I mean, if I look at old photos, it was relatively short, but it was an Afro, so
still enough to pick out.
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
But I never had it styled or anything because there just wasn't the access to that in
and they didn't know.
No.
Yeah, they didn't know. So tell me about school. Little Dave, only black face at school.
Yeah, so school, I mean, so my mum was a teacher by profession. She wasn't working when I was young because she chose not to. So I went to school was a whole thing, So in terms of being the only black face, I don't remember being or feeling different when I got into school.
Okay.
But that's maybe also because I was already different. So I ended up in the first year of school, my primary school, getting moved forward a year because I was overachieving. So already I'm kind of like, I'm dealing with quite a few standout things.
Yeah.
There's a couple of funny bits actually, I suppose, in that when I look back at photographs, I would dress in the school uniform, and it was almost like I was dressed to stand out because I was really kind of compliant in the school uniform. So shorts, shirt, tie, and if I could say Jesus sandals, do you know, like,
I do. Too. And now I need a picture. Now I need to see this picture.
Yeah, so listen, I wasn't really worried about standing out for being black. I was more worried about standing out
for other reasons. Shirt, tie, and Jesus sandals. Okay. Were there socks involved?
Yeah. Come on, you got to do the fashion right. Yeah, socks, and then
we don't need those pictures.
No, those pictures have been burned long ago, trust me. But yeah, and then I had glasses as well. I got glasses fairly early, so again, that's another thing that we have the NHS in the UK, and so there are NHS glasses back in those days, which were about as fashionable as Jesus sandals.
So, do you ever recall being, I don't know, I don't want to say picked on, but just kind of, like you said, you were standing out, but for other reasons. But as you get older and people start to realize, oh, his skin doesn't look like ours, or, something like that. When do those differences start happening?
Yeah, so primary school, infant school, there was one kid who was like the school bully, got excluded quite a lot. He picked on me quite early. I can't say whether that was because I was black or not, but I suspect that was a factor. Didn't last for very long though, because I I'm not a fighter, but I didn't rise to his bullying. So I can remember him swinging me around the schoolyard, but instead of crying, I would be laughing. And so very quickly he got bored.
Swinging you around the schoolyard is wild.
Yeah, yeah. Well, especially if you think we were like 5 years old or something, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you seem to have been like pretty resilient as a kid and you were just living and no one's making this big deal, at least not at school. Let me ask you about, I'm sorry, go ahead. Were you
Yeah, I
going to
was
say
just going to
something?
say a little bit later there were a couple of kids who did, and it was clearly racist. And this is interesting because I don't think, well, I know at the time I wasn't really aware that it was racist because I lived in quite
Mm,
an isolated world. So you've
okay.
heard of Lenny Henry, right? The comedian actor. You maybe not, but he's a
No.
big British blackface. He was a comedian at the time,
Okay.
and he used to do a skit where he'd talk in a Jamaican accent. And I can remember some kids coming up to me when I was about 8 or 9. They were older boys, maybe 2 years older, and they would be doing the Lenny Henry skit. But as a kid, you get a sense that they're not doing it to be friendly.
Right. Right. So I want to ask you about outside of the home within your extended family.
Mm.
How are they towards you? Because I have heard stories that in the home, our parents were cool, but the extended family never really got on board. What was that like for you?
Yeah, so again, like not really a problem that I was aware of. So on my dad's side, he had one brother, and and his brother had two children who were much older than me and my sister, like
Okay.
15, 20 years older. Um,
Oh.
and they were kind of, they were cool. And my dad's mum, so my nanny and pappy, we call them nanny and
Mm-hmm.
pappy,
That's
they were
cute.
really on board. Like I've got really fond memories of going down to the coast to visit them, and talking to my dad recently. Like my nanny in particular was really fiercely on board, which at the time, because we're talking about the UK in the 70s,
Okay.
that in itself was kind of quite a thing. And obviously, she was a lady from much older. So my
Mm-hmm.
dad's side were great and really on board, and we spent a lot of time. My mum's side, she's from a much bigger family, so she's one of 10.
Ooh.
Um, and when you're in one of 10, I think, and you kind of don't have the same dynamic of relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't say that they weren't on board either, but the sense of them being on board was much less. Like I just didn't feel the same level of connection with
Mm.
them if I
Just
look
because
back
they're
now.
so, yeah, it's just not as intimate as
Yeah,
the other side of the family.
and
I get that.
they were from different worlds, to be honest. So my dad's side were quite, God, you use the term middle class, and it kind of got all connotations, but they were comfortable, to say the least.
Okay.
Um, Whereas my mum's side, like they were living in a kind of quite a deprived area of Birmingham city.
Mm.
To
Okay.
give you an example, like my mum's upbringing was like when I went to visit my grandma and grandpa on that side, they still had an outdoor toilet. Um, my mum's upbringing was that they bathed where they pulled the bath in front of the fire to warm it up, and like they would dry clothes on a mangle. So there wasn't the space either for them to be as warm and cozy, and you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah. Oh, wow. And this is in
Yeah,
the 70s, 60s,
yeah,
70s, and we're still
70s.
using outhouses. Wow.
Yeah,
Wow. That's quite I'm putting that into perspective. That's quite the different,
yeah,
the
there's
two
quite a
worlds.
contrast.
So talk to me about, well, I have two questions. My first question is you did say you had a sibling that was also adopted from another family. Are they black also? Or
So she's mixed race.
okay. So there's you and then mixed race. Did your adoptive parents have any biological children?
No.
Okay, so there's just the two of you. And then Do you happen to know what made your parents adopt?
Yeah, I do, because I've had conversations with them recently, and I thought I knew, but it's always good to actually have the conversation to
Sure.
validate. And I appreciate them both being open to having those conversations. Um, so they 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 wanted. Well, there's two sides to every story, isn't there? So I've got my mum's side and I've got my dad's side.
Yeah.
They're not that different, but ultimately they wanted to adopt because they wanted to help. Um, I'm pausing because I'm conscious that there's the whole kind of savior piece, and there's an element of that, but it was about seeing that there were a lot of children out there in the world who needed adopting, who had special let's say special needs. So
Hmm.
it could have been that there were children with disabilities, as well as children that were hard to place for adoption agencies at that time.
Okay.
So that's what they wanted to do, and they'd fostered before we came along, me and my sister, and they fostered afterwards as well. And that the fosters tended to be beforehand, from what I've seen, they were Jamaican fosters, and afterwards there was a mixed race girl who I really remember because she came to us when she was 15,
Hmm.
so almost at the end of that fostering period, and I suppose because we were her last placement, if you like, we kind of
Okay.
really kind of we felt into a family. Like me and my sister have bumped into her. I say recently, but in the last 15 years, 20
Okay.
years, and there's still like a hey, yeah, like we have real fondness for that. So they wanted to. I think they wanted to adopt for that reason, and they both made a decision that they were comfortable doing that rather than having children of their own. What's
Okay.
interesting though, Tasha, is that it subsequently turned out that they couldn't have had children anyway, but they didn't
Mm,
know that at the time, which is interesting.
okay. So it seems like for overall, you had pretty much a stable childhood. Like, um, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, so there were a lot of things that I wasn't conscious of, but I was I was hot housed as a kid. Um,
Okay, you gotta pause. You gotta explain that. What's hot house mean?
yeah, so like just I don't know how you like really kind of a lot of focus on development and academic development. So to give you some examples, I was reading newspapers when I was 2 years old, and these weren't like the sort of mini newspapers. In the UK we have what's called broadsheets, the ones where like you've got to be sitting down to have them open because they're wide,
Mm-hmm.
like yeah, big,
At
big,
two,
big people newspapers. Yeah,
at two.
at two.
How do you get the 2-year-old to sit down and read?
Well, I mean, my mum was a teacher, so there was an intense focus. But of course, also, I'm coming at it as an adopted child who's
Right.
gone into a strange environment and is like, I want to please these people. So I'm like extra absorbent as a sponge. So my mum really fed into that. So, I was reading newspapers. By the time I was 5, I was fluent in French.
Hold on, stop. You just said something. You wanted to please these people. And so let me just take this all in so I can please these people. That is a deep statement,
Hmm.
but I'm sure you didn't realize that at that time. But yeah, because they
Yeah.
had you sitting down at two. I have a 2-year-old grandbaby. Let me tell you what he's not doing. That.
Yeah. Well, listen, I've got a 14-month-old son, and try as I might, I cannot get him to take any interest in doing anything but ripping up those
Rip
newspapers.
it right. Wow. But let's not deflect from the fact that you got to be gifted yourself to even. So yeah, they poured into you and they took that opportunity, but you're gifted, sir. If at 2 you were sitting down doing that. So let's not take away from that either.
Yeah, I mean, Yeah, okay, I'll take that because
Yeah,
I'm at an age now where I can, even though it still feels a little bit uncomfortable. But yeah, I'll take
yeah.
that.
Let's.
But yeah, there was a lot, and so that's some context of the child, and that continued, Tasha. So I said I was learning French by the time I was 5. I was doing maths. I was playing the piano. So by the time I was 9, I was I was learning German because I'd already done French and I was going to have to do that at school. I did a German O level, which is, I mean, they don't do O levels in the UK anymore. It's GCSEs, but they were a lot harder. And I was on
Okay, hold on,
television.
because we got some listeners in America too. So you
Yeah.
got to explain what's an O level, German O level. You got to break that down for us.
So this is this is harder than I thought it was going to be. Um, so the O level is the exam that you would take when you're 16. These are the exams that you take when you leave school. These are the exams you take
Okay,
at 16.
got you.
So I did a
Okay.
German one when I was, well, I started it when I was 9, when I was 10, and I passed it. I was on television, I was on the newspapers nationally because I was the youngest person ever to take and pass a German O
Do you see
level.
the look on my face right now? Like, what?
Well, this is what I mean about. So, like, there were a lot of things that were attracting attention for me, and of course, this is in the context that I'm in this small town. So,
Yeah.
as soon as I was in the news, everybody knew me. And I also played the piano to.
Of course you did. Because
There's 8
why?
grades of piano, and I got to grade 7 by the age of 10. And I was doing piano competitions, and so there was a whole. That's what I mean by hot house. Like I was there was an intensity in terms of the stuff that I was doing, and I enjoyed it at the time. And I look back and I think, yeah, I enjoyed it, but there was a lot. The,
Yeah.
the,
And
the other,
and I'm
yes,
sorry, I have to ask about your sister. Is she doing these same things?
no, I guess it must have been hard for her, um, like because yeah, like she's not. Um, she's got
Ooh, I would
a
love to
whole
talk to
load of
her.
other
She's got a
talents.
whole nother a viewpoint. I'm sure. I'm sure.
Yeah, I don't think there was ever any jealousy. I think it was all pride. And, as we grow up, I kind of look at my sister and think, yeah, do you know what? You got the emotional skill, you know what I mean? There's
Ah.
only so much room, right? There's only so much you can learn.
So, in my mind, I don't know if you're familiar with the show Young Sheldon or
Mm,
Big Bang Theory, or so
yeah,
this was so you were like young Sheldon and your sister was like his twin. In my mind, that's how I equate that. Got it. So, cause wow. So you're gifted, you're a genius. That's where that's it.
yeah. I mean,
Accept
people,
it.
yeah.
Go ahead and embrace it.
So the
Embrace
other
it.
bit of context was that in my particular area of the UK, so in my county, which is it's the equivalent of state, but obviously we're much smaller in the UK. You changed school at 10 and went to a different school for 3 years.
Okay.
So this whole German O level, going on the telly, being known as the child genius who speaks German and plays the piano, happened just as I was leaving the comfort of primary school to
Okay.
go to a new school at a different level. And you know how it is. If you've got a grandbaby, you'll have kids that have been through your first school. It's lovely, isn't it? I've got kids, and you kind of like, they just wrap their arms around them, and every teacher knows your kid's name. And then you go to the next school, and it's like, wow, it's like they've gone to work or something. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's really hands off.
Yeah.
So that change for me happened just at the point when I was like fully exposed. So I went into this school and you just kind of want to blend in. And I can remember being chased around by a couple of kids, not in a horrible way, not in a horrible way, but it was overwhelming. It's the German O level kid. And of course,
Because all this
I was the
attention
only
has
black
been
one.
on you, right? Wow. Yeah. So, how many languages do you speak?
It's not that it's literally German and French. My life changed quite a lot at 10 as well.
Okay, because I'm like, I have lost count. He was like, okay, all right.
Yeah.
So
A lot.
you're a genius. So we're riding that one. So you're getting older, and because now I'm getting an insight into how your brain thinks. At what point do you start thinking about, where do I come from? I know you have the scrapbook, and I know you're aware, but when does that curiosity start bubbling up? Can I go find these people?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, when did it start bubbling up is a harder question for me to answer than when did I act on it, because I think there was a big gap. So when did I act on it was when my daughter was born. She's
Mm.
17 now. And I didn't really act on it for me. I acted on it because I thought, I feel as though she needs to know.
Wow. Yeah, sometimes that's what it takes. Sometimes it's the birth of our own children that triggers something. So you have your scrapbook, and so there's some information that you know. How do you start this journey to find? Are you looking for birth mother first, or are you just looking for everybody?
No, birth mother first.
Okay.
I, so and this phrase coming out of the fog is really interesting to me because I kind of feel like I spent a long time in the fog, and I'm 48 years old now, and I've kind of started walking out of the fog in the last 5 years, even having found my birth mother, I would say, before that. And that's just to give some context in that. So that's because at 10, my adoptive parents separated. And so me as the child genius, who'd had a really
Ah,
structured, controlled environment,
sure.
went to be in literally complete freedom. So by the time I was 13, I was going to nightclubs and drinking. By the time I was 14,
Not the child prodigy.
no,
Oh, what?
I was, I was selling knockoff tights and perfumes to my school teachers.
Hold
To
on, let's roll this back. Mm-mm. Mm-mm. Let's roll this back. How? Because you did say at 10 things changed dramatically, but I thought you meant because you went to this new school. No, mom and dad have split up, and
mm,
now you are buck wild.
literally.
So, who's giving? Is it because they've split up and now nobody's really paying attention? Or did you have more freedom at one house over the other?
No, that's a great question. So they split up. I don't really remember the first couple of years after them splitting up. It's if I think about it now, like I reckon I just went into shock because it's a blur.
Mm,
Um, but what happened was my dad moved 20 miles away to a city. Like it's the same as Hinckley's in the middle of two big cities, Coventry and Leicester. My dad moved to Coventry. That's where he went to work, etc. So the arrangement was that my sister and I would go to stay with my dad, I think every other weekend.
okay.
But by the time I was 12, 13, I would go over in the day, but I'd be like, I don't even think it was that I didn't want to stay there, but I just had this freedom. Like I was, I was exploring like who I was or who I thought I wanted to be. So I would do things like I would say, I've got a party. My friends are having a party. Can you drop me back off in Hinckley in the evening? My mum would often be away, so I'd go back into the house. I'd I'm just paused because I wonder if my mum knows the extent of it.
She's about to
But like,
know now.
like we'd have little parties, um, or I'd go out to nightclubs with older friends. So I guess to your question, it wasn't that I had more freedom in one place than the other. It was that my dad was no longer there, other than at the weekends, and I kind of opted out of that a little bit because I found that I could. And as a young teenager, it's like, yeah, if I can
Yeah.
not spend time with my dad and spend time doing adult stuff, what am I going to do? And my mum, like, it just I don't without wanting to sort of go into her story too much, like it
Yeah.
hit her hard. So it felt to me as though
Mm.
like I was, well, to put it in adoption parlance as well, it felt to me like I was abandoned again, and I didn't feel like that at the time,
Ooh.
but it was just like, wow. It's just me, myself, and I. So I'm going to do what I need to do and what I want to do. And obviously, as a 12, 13-year-old, you don't really know. So I got drunk and sold tights and perfumes. And
Listen, what are you getting drunk off of at 12 and 13? What are you drinking?
wow, I mean, they had these back in the day. They had these drinks in the UK called Mad Dog 2020.
Oh,
Any
we
UK?
had Mad Dog 2020 over here, and that tastes like cough syrup. Ugh.
Yeah, but you know that little kids like cough syrup, right?
Yeah, you're aging yourself for sure. Mad Dog 20. We're about the same age, so yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. At 12 and 13, though, I didn't know about that till I got to college, though. And I'm just a tad bit older than you. So yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I started early. I went full cycle. Like there's a friend who is still one of my best friends who lived opposite my mum and dad, and obviously then my mum. So he's kind of observed, and we caught up the other month, and he was talking to me about how, you know, I went from being this kind of quite geeky, gawky, you know, very focused kid to becoming the most popular kid in town. And this is what I mean when I say that me being black then kind of became an advantage, because I got to know everybody and everybody got to know me. You know, it came to the point where my sister was known as Dukey's sister. That's what was my nickname,
Yeah.
as opposed to her own name in
Her
her
own
own right. You
identity.
know,
Yeah.
because I just went about becoming popular. And again, if I think back on it, it's kind of that, well, I need to try and find a tribe, and I'm going to find a tribe of everybody.
Ooh, adoption hits us in so many different facets that we don't even realize until much later on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm sorry, I had to pull that back because you were like, I got buck wild. Wait a minute. I need that story. Okay.
Yeah,
So back to my original question. Tell me about, how do you go about finding, like, what are the first steps you take to find your birth mom?
yeah. So I went to an agency, charity agency, called After Adoption. I don't think they exist anymore because of cutbacks, and they were brilliant. And because I knew my birth mum's name and I knew my original name, so I was born Ashley Mark Robinson. So because of that, they could do some searching, and they were successful in terms of searching and finding my birth mum. And then they contacted her to say, we've got your son here, he wants to make contact, do you want to have contact back? And there was a woman who I guess was kind of like a counsellor at the time, who was just preparing me for, you know, all sorts of different outcomes, like she may not want contact, she may not be able to deal with it. And then I wrote her a letter, which they sent on, so that there's that kind of separation of, you know, our identity and all that kind of stuff. And really, my letter was about just saying thanks to her. I wasn't searching for a tribe or, you know, anything like that at that time, or even heritage or culture. I was just conscious that it must have been a really difficult decision for her. And so I wanted to just give her that peace of mind to say, thank you. Like, you know, I was a child genius and I'm fairly happy. And, you know, I like, if you were worrying about the decision, I just want to let you know, I'm at peace with it. You should be at peace with it. And my perspective then was, if she didn't respond or didn't want contact, then I don't know if that would have been fine. Thankfully, it didn't work out that way, but it wasn't my intention that I wanted another family. It was just my intention that I just want to let this woman know that, hey, like, don't beat yourself up about it.
And she responds to
Yeah.
what she say.
Oh, God. I mean, she was quite cautious. I can't remember. I was looking through again. I don't have the letter, but she must have been like, she responded positively, and we started building a relationship. I think I wrote her a letter back, but it took a little while because at the time I was going through a contact battle in the courts to have contact with my daughter, who was what she would have been 12, 18 months. So that was a whole thing that I think was also overlaying on,
Sure.
my emotional state, because I'd suddenly gone, wow, now I've got a daughter. Like, my daughter was a delightful, fantastic accident. So me and her mum were never in a relationship, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm going, I've got a daughter, and I've got these. There's some kind of feeling going on here. Because if you'd asked me up to that point, I would have sworn that blood was not thicker than water.
Mm.
And then my daughter came along
Wow.
and really
Yeah.
challenged that for me, and that's when I was like, oh, maybe I should do something for her to try and find out. And so, yeah, I wrote to my birth mum. We wrote back, and then we arranged to meet.
Mm.
Yeah.
What was that like, that first meeting?
So I knew you were going to ask this because I've
Of
watched your other
course.
podcasts, and I'm like, I don't remember. Like, again, it was that like I know where we met, and I brought my daughter along as a bit of a, like 2-year-olds are great as a comfort blanket in these scenarios. Um, and I remember, like, going into the pub and her getting dropped off, but I don't remember how I felt. I don't. I think because of the history of it and that I've shared with you so far, I kind of didn't really start feeling things until my late 30s. So if you ask me
Mm.
how did stuff feel, I'm kind of like, well, I can tell you what I thought.
Well, what did you think?
Well, I thought this is kind of, yeah, I just thought this is crazy. This is something to get through. It was like another challenge, It was like, yeah, I just need to get through this. And it was nice, we sat and we talked.
What did you
Um,
learn about yourself? And like, as far as where you come from, what did you learn?
so yeah. So the other thing that the adoption agency did was they found my records, and my records were quite detailed.
Mm.
So I already had a bit of a picture in terms of where I came from, which I
Okay.
think also informed me and my empathy for my birth mum. So she was Jamaican. She'd been brought across as the second wave of her parents' children, because often they'd bring over the first wave and then they'll bring the second wave later. So she came over with
Okay.
them, but she was then estranged from them. So she was living literally on her own as a 16-year-old with
Mm.
an 18-month-old, my brother, in a hostel. And the hostel wouldn't allow her to have more than one child. So she had to make a choice. Did she keep me, or did she keep my older brother?
Oh, okay.
So I
How
kind
do
of
you feel?
knew this before.
I don't know. We're not gonna mull over that. How does that make you feel when you hear something like that, or when you read something like that?
Now, as you could probably hear in my voice as I told it, like I had to hold it down a little bit. So it makes me feel really sad. It makes me feel angry that a system existed where she had to, like, we're not in a war zone, but she's having to make decisions that you might expect to have to make in a war zone.
Mm,
At the time when I read it, I think it made me feel sad, but not in the same way. Like I recognised it was a sad thing, but I didn't feel it.
right, right, because you're in a whole different headspace.
Yeah.
You're busy getting drunk, and
Well, yeah, let's say then, because I was in my
and
30s. But yeah,
selling stuff.
yeah.
Okay. So, um, so you meet her, you find out. Do you find out any information about your birth father at this time?
So this,
Or
yeah,
were
this,
your hold on, were your records that detailed? Because I mean, for your records to be so detailed and correct, that's real different. Because a lot of us
yeah.
have incomplete information or no information, or the information that we have is not true or half truths. So I'm pretty impressed at the accuracy of your records.
Yeah, I think I've been really fortunate because I think it's unusual in the UK as well. So it had. So my birth father was an American who was part of the US Air Force who was over partying. Um,
Ah.
and he'd written and they'd written to each other. And there was a letter in my records from his solicitors representing him saying, could my birth mother hold off from the adoption for 12 months so he could see whether he could get things together to be able to have me. That's the only
Mm.
correspondence. Now, when I speak to my birth mother, my birth father is the only person that I've ever heard her swear about. She feels, and it's in my records as well, actually, because she must have communicated to the social workers that he made her promises that he didn't keep. Now, look,
Uh-huh.
they were young, right? And there's a
Sure.
whole 5,000, or more than that.
There's a whole
He's in the
pond
way.
between them. Yeah.
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 But I did have that little bit of information. And what was interesting is I had the address of the solicitors, and I went to America because I had some friends living in LA. So I'd already started visiting America, weirdly, in the West Coast. And
Okay.
I remember going to America with a friend, and we hired a car and went from LA to San Francisco. And I insisted that we went to Oakland because this was the address of the solicitors. And we went and drove up to the address.
Hmm.
And I didn't do anything.
Oh, I was like, how did that work out in Oakland?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah. Yeah. And it was only the solicitors, and there weren't solicitors there anymore. But I kind of sat there, so that was my first little inkling of, the seed maybe was starting to be sown about curiosity about my birth father,
Sure.
which I then left for years and years and years.
So now after the seed has been planted, do you go and try and find him at any point?
Yeah, so after I found my birth mum, and we had a wonderful relationship, like a real, like after that first meeting, it kind of was like, yeah, just a connection.
Okay.
Crazy, like little things. Like I remember the first time I went to stay at her house, and her house was always full because she'd got two other daughters. She'd had two daughters after me,
Oh,
and
you
they
had
both got children
siblings.
and things. Yeah, there's some weird coincidences around that. But the first time I went to stay at a house, I have a thing where I like to have at least two towels to dry myself down after I have a bath or a shower. I stayed at her house for the first time. She lays me three towels out on the bed. I'm like, who does that? Well, this is like, and again, this is these little things where I start
Yeah.
going, this is weird. Like, there's something in this connection stuff after
Sure.
all.
Tell me
Um,
about those connections with your siblings, those weird little things.
yeah, so my youngest birth sister, my sister, as I call her now, because time has
Yeah,
gone.
yeah, yeah.
I told some friends in a nearby village, one of my few black friends that I had at the time, but I told my friends in a nearby village that I was going to find my birth mother and that I got a younger sister. And I remember them saying to us that we passed somebody actually waiting at the bus stop who, now you mention it, looks a bit like you.
Mm.
So when I met my sibling, my sister, I asked her if she'd been living in this village, and she had been living there. So it was, and again, she would have been probably the only other black person in the village, which was why they clocked her. So they'd already seen her before I'd seen her.
Wow.
It's crazy.
And when you met your mother and your sisters, are you seeing yourself in them?
No, because we're
Okay.
all from different fathers.
Okay.
Like,
Okay.
people tell me I look like my birth mother. I can really see it in my daughter.
Mm.
Don't really see it in myself. Um, so I'm not getting that, wow, we look the same. But what was interesting was that I felt really comfortable, and it was nice to feel comfortable around black people because, being honest, Tarcia, up until then, I kind of felt as though I was, and this added into the feeling of isolation. Like, and I've heard people on your pod and others say it before, like I was too white for the black people and too black for the white people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Because listen to me, right? I don't sound like a black person.
I love your accent, so I don't see what the problem is personally.
Well,
But
listen, I'm cool
I
being me
get
now.
it
You
though.
know what I mean?
I
Yeah.
get it. But so how long did you have your relationship with your mother?
12 years. Yeah, fantastic. She passed away in COVID, technically from COVID, so quite
Mm,
suddenly, and that was a real, yeah, like
yeah.
that was a grenade going off for me in a lot of ways.
So I have two questions. My first question is, when you went to go find I'm still focused on your birth mother. Were your adoptive parents okay with this, or at this point, I mean, I know you're real grown at this point, but how did they feel about you doing this?
Yeah, they were supportive. They weren't actively supportive, but then they didn't necessarily need to be. That I was
Sure.
worried about how it would. I was particularly worried about how it would affect my mum because it's just mum, birth mum. I was worried more, and I was a dad at the time, so I was kind of like, yeah, do you know what? And my dad's he's quite chill in that respect. But I was like, yeah, I don't think this is going to be an issue for dad, but it could be for mum. So I was worried or conscious about how it could
Hmm.
feel. But I'm the kind of guy who deals with stuff up front. So I spoke to them about it, told them, and they were like, yeah, we get it. But there wasn't any more than that because I'm full grown. So it was just like, yeah, you
Right.
go and do your own thing.
Right.
And bear in mind
And
as well, sorry, Tasha, like I'd just been through representing myself at court to get to win contact with my 18-month-old daughter. So I think they were kind of like, yeah, he's full grown, like, and if there's
full
emotional stuff he
grown.
needs to deal with, like, yeah,
And he's still a genius.
well, yeah, there's that.
There's that. Oh, I didn't forget. There's that. And then I want to ask, and I'm asking for a personal reason. When you lose your mother after 12 years of having contact, having a relationship, can you talk about that grief for a little bit?
Yeah, that even now, because it's only 4 years ago,
Hmm.
was profound and surprised me in terms of how profound it was,
Mm,
and also very confusing because I've lost a mother who I've connected with, and there's clearly a connection that goes back to the womb and beyond,
mm,
but I've still got a mother that's alive. So it's confusing. And then I've got siblings who are dealing with the loss of a mother they've known all their lives. So I also don't feel like I have the same right to grieve. So the grief, I'm not sure that I'm fully allowed myself to process that grief yet. Um,
mm,
like it comes out, and it came out on the day of the funeral. Um, but in between, I guess I defaulted to me, which was very good at, managing things, running things, making decisions. Like, I've had a whole career and, I've been relatively successful in my field. So I'm kind of like, yeah, I can do this. And obviously, I'm a child genius, so I can do this anyway. You know what I mean? So, like, the whole grief thing didn't really come through. But the siblings were wonderful, and they allowed me and invited me in to be a part of the funeral and encouraged me. And
mm,
so I spoke at the funeral, and this
mm,
was the first time that I'd met almost all of my other wider family. So my birth mum told the siblings, obviously, but she didn't tell like her sisters or brothers. So I can remember going to my sister's house, my birth sisters, to sort of start sorting out funeral arrangements, expecting to see the two sisters and maybe my birth brother. My birth brother's got he's had a difficult life as well.
Mhm.
And there were 3 or 4 people there, and I walked into the lounge, and people were like, "Who's this?" And my birth sister had to go, "Oh, this is David. Like he's our brother. He's Doreen's son." And they're like, so a lot of people are finding out for this at the first time. So I did a speech at the funeral where I kind of, again, it's a weird one because I'm grieving, but I'm also introducing myself, and I also wanted to really honour the the sacrifice that Doreen had made. So, you know, that whole having to make a choice between me and my brother, because people wouldn't have known this. So the funeral was, I mean, I can feel it now as I talk about it. Like it was, whew, yeah,
Yeah.
it was a lot.
Yeah. I asked the question because I had a similar experience. Because I found my birth father and 4 months later lost him.
Oh, sorry to hear.
And this just happened in 2024. This just happened. And so that grief, and I had the same experience as I have siblings who invited me in, but I can understand what you're saying. Like you feel like they just lost their daddy. I just lost my birth father, whom I never really got to, I only got to see him twice. But how I described it, I just said, we're grieving differently. You're grieving in a whole different way than I'm grieving, but we're all still grieving. So I would encourage you to try and process that and allow yourself to feel, because I can already tell you're not real big on emotions. That is not the top of your list of things to do. But be okay with feeling, because it's going to come and go. Because for me, it comes and go, and it just shows up just out of nowhere. It's like, where did that come from? And so, oddly enough, just yesterday, like the last time I got to actually see him was actually via FaceTime. One of my sisters had called me. He was already in the nursing home. And I pulled over at the CVS because I was driving to speak to him, not knowing this was going to be our last interaction.
Mm.
And I passed by the CVS yesterday, and I kind of was like, kind of got triggered a little bit. It's like, whew.
Do you know,
But
it's so crazy. I had a similar thing with my birth mum. So we'd had we hadn't had a falling out, but I tried on a number of occasions to. This is my side of it, to arrange for me and my daughter to go and see her, and she'd cancelled on like 3 occasions. I think the last one was like she'd got a migraine or something, and I'm sure it was genuine, but I just kind of got to that, you know, and you act up as the kid a little bit, I think, still, even though you know, and I was like,
sure.
oh God, wow, I'm
Hmm.
making all the effort, and you're not. So I just thought I'm just going to leave the ball in your court. Like, come to me because I keep coming to you, and like, you know, come to me. And she didn't for a while, and then my sister, my birth sister, said something like, you know, oh, Mum thinks you're in a Mardy with her, and I'm not in a Mardy with her. Just anyway, I thought, do you know what? Someone's got to sort this out. So I think I went round to take some Christmas presents or something like that. And in typical fashion, we had like a conversation that was like, were you in a Mardy with me? No, I thought. So for your international viewers, right, Mardy is like, are you in a mood? It's a real Leicestershire thing. Are you in a, no, I thought you were in a Mardy with me. And then we just laughed and, you know, we got back and it was all back on track. And that was like a couple of months before she
Yeah,
passed. And I'm just like, I'm so glad,
sure.
because it would have been a whole different scenario if
Yeah,
she hadn't. So we kind of got that old thing back again. And yeah, it's weird how that happens though,
yeah,
right?
yeah. So, while all this is going on, have you already met your birth father, or does this come after?
Yeah, so it sort of started before, because I remember telling her that I was good, because I thought I want to tell her out of courtesy that I've found him. So I found him, I'm gonna say, a year before. It was a lot harder to find him than it was to find her.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I well, I had a name, and his name's quite distinctive, which is helpful. Like, he's not John Smith. People laugh because I'm kind of, their friends are like, you're quite a flamboyant guy. Of course, your dad would have that name. Um, so that made it a bit easier. But of course, I'm trying to search for somebody based on a solicitor's address from 1976
Oh, sure.
in a foreign country that
Yeah.
has got all kinds of different data privacy. And
Yep.
anyway, I did a bit of searching. I found somebody on the internet, on LinkedIn actually, of all places, who I thought could be him. If I'm honest with you, Tarcia, there was a picture, and when I looked at the photo, I was like, yeah, I kind of reckon this has got to be him, you know.
I have that same type of story. Go ahead.
Yeah, but there's a couple more crazy coincidences. I think really, weird things. So anyway, I've got a friend in America who's an American citizen, like American born, as opposed to my friends in LA that are UK but have moved out. So I got her to pay a private investigator. It wasn't like it was more of a sort of online, but you had to pay. You had to have an American-based check card to be able to pay it. So I got her to pay. That brought up a narrowed down shortlist of 5 results. I think 2 of them had phone numbers. So I phoned the phone numbers, and I left a message for the one that I thought was most likely. I don't think I got a response, so I left another message. Then I left it for a while. And then my girlfriend at the time, we were kind of chatting about it, and she went, "Listen, just I'll try calling," because I was like, I don't want to call because I've tried a couple of times.
Yeah.
She called, got through first time, didn't she? Oh, so weird. So we're sat in the lounge, and I'm listening to her, and she's just being polite and speaking, but I'm going, "Hey, give me the phone now." You know what I mean? Like, it's my dad. So we speak, and it was like she kind of said, "Listen, I've got this guy here, and he thinks that he might be related," and then put me. We speak, and he was a little bit cagey at first. Like, I told him dates, and he was like, "No, I was in the UK, but not on that year." So he was cagey enough that to me it was obvious. I was like, "Come on, mate."
Yeah.
Like, you would have known outright, and you're going, "Well, I might have been, but not that." I'm like, "Come on."
Yeah.
So eventually, he kind of was like, "Yeah, okay, it was me." And then we talked a little bit more, and then I had arranged, or I was taking I was going on holiday to America with my daughter and my partner at the time, and her daughter, my stepdaughter, and we decided to do a bit of a tour where we'd meet him for the first time as well.
Oh.
So he lives in California. So we went to California for a bit because I know that area anyway. I wanted to take them all to San Francisco and Monterey and all those places.
Okay.
So we arranged, me and my birth father, to meet on a one-to-one first. He was like, "Oh, I'd love to meet your daughter, my granddaughter as well." And I'm like, "Oh,
Wait a minute.
hold
Hold
on.
on. Right.
Yeah, like, you're moving a bit fast here. This is
Right.
you're the guy who wasn't sure whether you were in the UK at the time, 5 months ago."
Yeah.
So I arranged to meet him on a one-to-one. This is weird. So I drove there, and as you can probably gather from me, I plan things in advance. I'm a worrier. There's probably a bit in the adoption stuff from that as well. So I'm thinking I'm going to go to the place half an hour earlier than we say. A, because there might be some traffic, and B, because I want to just feel comfortable in the area beforehand. So I get to this place. It's like a quayside inland, and I drive around a little bit in the hire car, just scope it out, and then I find the car park that's for the place that we're going to meet. Drive around that because I'm kind of going, because the thing as well with America is like you guys do everything is big, so like I'm just like, I need to drive around this car park 3 times to work out which area I want to be parked in. And there's a whole tactics thing as well going on in terms of, well, do I want to have to walk all the way past him, or do I?
You're
I'm
quite
an
the warrior.
Yeah, I'm a warrior. I'm an overthinker. Like, yeah, my brain is my weapon. Anyway, I choose a spot, pull into it next to a car with a guy sat in there. And as I pull in, and he's not really clocked me, this guy gets out, and as he gets out of the car, I'm just going, I've just got a feeling, like, so to your point about emotions, like I'm getting better at that. So I've got a feeling, okay, this is him. And then he turns around and it's him. Like, you know how big these open space American car
Yes, I
parks are.
do.
I'm
And you
like,
park right.
park right next to him. Crazy.
So how was that relationship then? Because this is a couple years now.
Yeah. So look, it's good.
Okay.
He's got a lot to live up to in the sense that my relationship with my birth mother was such a connection on such an emotional level that I think I was expecting him to be like her.
Ooh, yeah, don't do that.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
know,
don't do
right?
that.
This is
Did you, yeah, dig a nice little hole for yourself doing stuff like that. I have too found out. Do you have siblings on that side as well?
yeah. I've got two sisters on that side.
And do you have relationship with them?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously it's across the pond, so it's the kind of and actually with his brothers and sisters as well. I found it difficult with my birth father, just because I think I was expecting a lot emotional intelligence, but also there were little things at that first meet that just felt as though it was more about him than about me. So I mean, bless him, he turned up for the first meet with my daughter and my family wearing a T-shirt that says "The best dads get promoted to grandpas."
Oh.
Yeah, right.
Oh.
And there
You
were
were
words,
like, sir,
and they
pipe down. You're doing too much.
yeah.
Yeah.
And and he's sending cards every week saying, oh, my granddaughter, we love you all. And in the back of my mind, I'm going, listen, mate, you had 46 years and you did nothing. You didn't write a letter. Because I'm like, I've got friends now, and I suppose part of this is from my experience with my daughter, but I've got a couple of friends now who've had to give their children up for adoption, and they ask me what to do. And I'm like, just write them a birthday card every year, because if they ever come and find you, knowing that you thought about them and that there is
Mm.
something will make a difference. And I'm like, you had 46 years, mate. So don't come on strong with it. I'm so proud that that was grating for me at first. I'm kind of coming to the sense now that, look, he is just who he is, and he's enthusiastic, and actually, like, he may have played it in the wrong way,
Yeah.
but the intention
Yeah.
overall, like, he's a warm. Do you know what I mean? Like, I've been a bit like, oh, come on, mate, at times, and he's not walked away, which he could have done if that was
He
his
could
way,
have. Yeah.
you know?
And I can tell, well, I can feel, because I can feel it just talking to you, how that can just be annoying. Because it's like, it's a whole lot, and I'm still trying to process this, and you've gone from 0 to 100 in a matter of seconds. Can I just
Yeah.
shake your hand and say hello?
We had a big cookout arranged, and it was like I felt like I was being paraded. I look back at
Ah,
some of the photos and videos because they said, "Oh, can you make a speech?" And I look back and I'm going, I really don't want to do this, and I really don't want to do it because I don't want to have to kind of not be true to myself. But I can't be true to myself because how I'm feeling at this moment will be unkind. So I've got to go along with it. People pleasing again, right?
people
But
pleasing.
you know,
Yeah.
but at that point, I'm conscious, so I'm sort of going, "You're making me people please, and I don't like this." So yeah, there was stuff that was grating, but we're on a decent keel now. In fact, so much so that I'm going back this year
Okay.
in June with my daughter, and we're going to go to Louisiana, to New Orleans, because that's where he was from, and he's still got some old relatives there.
Ah,
And I'm like, I want my daughter and me to be able to hear some of the stories
sure.
from them before it's too late. And I'd need to do it
Absolutely.
now because for my daughter, it's like she's great, but I don't want her to get to 30 and go, oh, I wonder. So I'm dragging her out now.
Yeah, and New Orleans is great. But I don't know if you're going to New Orleans. Did you say New Orleans? Yeah, we were just there over the holidays. Great place to visit. We're gonna have a
Yeah,
good
I've
time.
been before. I'm like, yeah, I just wish my daughter was 21 because we'd have a great time.
Just make sure you go to Loretta's to get your beignets, and that's a
The
great
rest.
free plug for her. Go to Loretta's to get the beignets. Trust me. So my final question for you, because I can talk to you all day, but we cannot do that. If you had anything to say to the adoptee community, it's going to be tough for you, about how to feel about being a transracial adoptee, what would you tell this little kid or teenager that's trying to figure these things out? What would you say to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. You're right. It is tough.
Yeah, I know.
This is kind of why I wanted to come on, because I by finding my birth mother and going through that process, and also by having a therapist that supported me through that, I found out that I hadn't been feeling, and I realised what truly feeling was. Like, this may sound crazy, but I felt happiness for the first time, actually felt it rather than thought it, in my late 30s.
Ooh, that's good.
And that opened up a whole new world of opportunity, also vulnerability. So, there's a whole side of me now that isn't as resilient, in inverted commas, as it was. So my advice to that kid would be, try and open up to it, allow yourself to open up to it, and take the time to allow yourself to flow with it, breathe into it, sit with it. It won't hurt you. And if it takes longer, that's okay as well. It took me till I was in my mid-30s, and I'm still working, because Tarcia's called me out on it twice in this conversation. So it's all right, but just sit with it. It won't hurt you.
You learn how to feel, to be happy and not just think it.
Yeah.
How many people are doing that? I've never heard it verbalized like that. That's a good one. That's a good one.
You should have seen me when I felt it for the first time. I was like a little child.
That on that note, I want to thank you so much for telling your story, being vulnerable and open. You were going to help somebody. Somebody needed to hear this conversation. And I'm so glad that you wanted to come on and do this. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
Don't leave me. Hang on one second. And on that note, bye, family.
Journey on. You need a pie with the good. Oh yeah, what is the one?